The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Well, welcome to Meet the Author. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're going to be talking to Dan Barrett. He's from Troy. He's just written his first novel here. It's like a mystery, suspense, thriller type. It's called Conch Town Girl. We're going to talk about his book, his writing, and I guess we've been talking about Troy before we start. We'll be probably talking about Troy. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
Now, before we talk about your book and about writing and all this stuff and your unique way of starting, give us the capsule short summary biography so people can know who you are.
Well, I was originally born in Rutland, Vermont. My whole family came down. My father was in the blacktop paving business in Troy, and I grew up in Troy. Went to St. Augustine's. I was in the Underground Catholic Railroad, St. Augustine's to Catholic High to Siena College, and wound up with a bachelor's in finance from Siena. And then I went on, and 10 years later got an MBA from RPI. So I started working in banking for 10 years. Left banking, and when I got my degree from RPI, I went to work for Norton Company as the manager of financial planning and administration worldwide, and was there for 7-8 years, and then decided when they wanted to move me to Reynosa, Mexico, that I went out to the RPI Tech Park and was on my own ever since. So I've been an independent contractor for 25 years. And I started writing grant proposals. I wrote for 80 school districts, colleges, universities, nonprofit organizations. I knew nothing about grant writing.
But you were like a consultant kind of?
A consultant, right. And I knew nothing about grant writing, like I knew nothing about writing a book. Okay. And I actually won over $200 million writing grant proposals over the last 20 years for at-risk kids mostly to improve their educational status.
All right, so you have a unique story here. I'm kind of smiling because we'll talk about this. So how did you go from grant writing, because this is your first book published, but you've already got 4 done, you were telling me.
Yeah.
How did you go from grant writing to mystery thriller writing?
While I was grant writing, I'd read 10 newspapers a day because I had to stay on top of the current events. And I was a finance major, had nothing to do with writing grants, other than grants are lost because no one could do a budget. The budgets would not match the words. And I was told, even when I was at Norton Company, that I could actually verbalize and put in writing with the marketing people who could not talk to finance. I hadn't read a book. 25 books I've read in 25 years because of family and growing up and kids and sports. I decided to start reading books because I couldn't stand TV other than watching Yankee games. I started reading, and as I read 175 books the first year. I really got hooked into reading books, and over 6 years I've read 1,500 books, and I decided that I read 600 or 700 of them that I probably could have written.
All right,
so I started writing books.
When you went on your reading binge, and I have the list here. I don't want you people to think that you ended up 1,586 different books. I'm sure there's more since you did this. Over 450 different authors. When you first started reading, after working for 20, 30 years, was the plan to write a book then, or you just wanted to read something different?
No, I've actually, when you write grants, you walk around with these things in your head. And the same thing with stories that I've been told over the years and growing up and how we lived and everything else. And I verbalized it, and I've never written it down. So I decided to start writing. And one incident happened working with nonprofit organizations. I started reading a lot about how they've been being ripped off and money was stolen and laundering and all that. So I just started to write a book about some small nonprofit in Albany that I made up and how it became involved with money laundering scheme. And as I started writing and writing, it became easier and easier for me, and I couldn't put my pen down.
Did you find your knowledge of nonprofits to just sort of...
all my background and knowledge,
but
I knew exactly how they were being ripped off, exactly how it could happen because of my finance degree.
So you saw, in your book, you saw how this could happen.
Yes. And then I made it happen.
And then as I think we all read in the papers, these nonprofits, they do have substantial amounts of money in them.
Yes, they do. And And it's very difficult because what happens, a nonprofit would grow from a mom and pop, $500,000 to now they're 10, 20, $30 million. The people who originally started them really can't keep up with all the new laws, regulations, and rules. And quite frankly, they're ripe for being picked off across the country, not just in the capital region, but everywhere.
I know a lot of them, the amount of money they put into fundraising gets larger and larger. And
Right. No, it does, and they get more and more funds, and they have to do more and more things, and sometimes it gets very convoluted of exactly what they wrote about in the original grant to what they have to do. So I started writing a book about that, and it involved to a character named Joe Trainer. And
who's in this book?
Who's in that book.
Okay.
And then it evolved into my second book because Joe Trainers originally went to school at Catholic Central High School, and he got a scholarship to go to MIT and was bored and joined the Coast Guard for 10 years and was in the espionage division. But obviously, if he's in the Coast Guard, he was going to head south towards Florida eventually, and he wound up in Isla Mirada and Key Largo and all this, and he met this young girl when she was 10 years old, which was the basis for Conch Town Girl, and it's a conch, by the way.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I said Conch.
Yep.
Conch Town. So before we talk about the book, I just want one more thing about all your reading. When you started out on this binge of 1,500 books, do you remember the first book?
Yes.
Well,
The first one was by Carl Hyacin. Matter of fact, the list goes in order of who I actually read.
okay.
So the 450th would be the 450th author I've read, not book I've read.
Now,
And the first book was Flush.
Okay.
It was actually not a kid's book, but like a middle school book written by Carl Hyacin, who is probably the funniest author I've ever read.
So did you work your way through every author, like read 20 books by an author, then go on to the next author, or were you always mixing them up?
When I first started, like the first 40 or 50 books, that's exactly what I did. And the reason I read Carl Hyacin, I saw it sitting there where I was working, and I picked it up. I knew Carl Hyacin because my son graduated from the University of Miami back in 2001, and the guest speaker that day was Carl Hyacin. And he spoke for about a half an hour, and he was irreverent, and he was funny, and I didn't realize that he was an author. I knew he was a newspaperman for the Miami Herald. I picked it up, started reading, and go, this is really good.
Okay.
So then I went through every one of Carl Hyacin's books. That's kind of what I do. When I write grants, I kind of go through all the technology grants. That's just the way I'm kind of,
So
the RPI motivation, I think.
So when you got to, I noticed on your list, when you got to Robert Parker, you just read like 40 in a row, kind of?
I just picked up every Robert Parker. And I love Spencer. Spencer
yes,
for Hire is the great, him Hawk, I just love that. Some of his others are not so good. You know, Jesse
Stone.
Jesse Stone, I like him, but he did some Westerns were not to my liking.
Well, I'll just tell people, I'll give you some of the authors that you went through, besides Robert Parker: Stuart Woods, Nelson DeMille, Michael Connolly, David Baldacci, John Grisham, Lee Child, James Lee Burke, Linda Barnes, Sarah Paretsky, etc. Now, I have to say, if you know all these authors, people watching, or I know all these authors from working in the library for so long, you set out, you're not writing the great American novel, as they say. These are genre, I guess you could say genre writers. They write thrillers, mysteries, suspense. What do you think, I don't want to get into literary versus genre, but or maybe I do, I don't know. What do you think, how are these authors different from William Faulkner, Mark Twain, like literary? I don't know what do you think the attraction is? Because I've been a librarian for so long. These are by far the most popular authors. Whenever any of these guys have a new book out, our library, we have to buy 10 copies.
Exactly, because they're popular.
But what do you think, is there more to it than that, you think? Or?
It's funny, because when I went to Siena College, I was a finance major, but I was an English literature minor. And I had to read 40 books back then, and that's probably why I stopped reading, because when I graduated, I couldn't stand it any longer. But I had to read those because I was forced to read those kind of books.
Yeah.
I read these purely for pleasure.
Okay.
And what happened when I went to the first librarian, I go, well, I read Carl Hyacin. Who would you recommend? They go, well, how about Randy Wayne White?
Okay.
I went through all of Randy Wayne White's, and I went through authors like that, and then every time they recommended something, I didn't know any different. I read what they recommended.
So when you were doing this, I mean, I find this fascinating, because many of these authors, I can't say I've read as many as you. I kind of read all over the place, but like I've read Spencer and some of these other
But my favorite is Richard Russo, which is not
yes,
a
he's
mystery.
more of a literary. But at what point when I don't want to say exact book. At what point were you developing? I could write a book just as good as these guys, or I could write better, or.
Well, I know exactly the date I started the book
Okay.
because that's what I kind of do.
You seem very exact with all your lists and everything.
Well, I started in February 2013, and I know that because every year I wanted to keep track, and that was the date I first started reading, was on February 22nd, 6 years ago. So on that date, I said, instead of reading books this year, I'm going to write books this year. And I still read a couple hundred books, but I was reading for pleasure. Now I stopped, and every day I would write 1 to 2 chapters, 1,500 to 2,000 words. My first book I wrote in 41 days.
Right.
Now, it took me 120 days to correct what I wrote.
Yeah.
I mean, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to write a book.
So-
I was just writing it as a story, hoping that it came out at the end.
So what do you think with your base? I guess you could say the base you built on. What do you think you learned from all these authors, both the good ones and the bad ones? Or I don't want to say bad, or the books you didn't.
Yeah,
really
there's
think.
not. I thought about that. There's authors that I'm not crazy about, but it doesn't make them bad authors. Because I thought about that. I'm now in the International Thriller Writers. They asked me to join in the debut program, and they wanted me to do a blog. So in there, I started thinking about it. There's a lot of books that I probably don't like. But someone did, because if you're a published author, there's 25,000 published authors in the entire world, period.
Yeah.
So to write a book and get it published, it's quite an accomplishment, actually. Not that I'm saying that because
Yeah.
of mine, but I'm just thinking out loud. So because I don't like it doesn't mean I'm the only one who doesn't like it or does like it.
Well, I mean, there's all authors
There's
that you and I
authors
probably
that-
don't like, and some we like. And yeah,
Exactly. But I'll read anything at any time to see, because everyone has something to offer. I went through mainly to find out how they got from point A to point B. When I used to write a grant, there was always a beginning, a middle,
Yeah.
and an end. When I started my book, I wrote the beginning and I wrote the end. I then went to the middle, just like I would write a grant, to figure out where I should be on page 150 versus page 350. And then I wasn't sure. Every book had to have at least 10, 15 pages per chapter. So I knew where I had to be, because, see, I'm looking at it just like I was writing a grant proposal.
Okay.
But I had to write a 315-page grant proposal. So it's like someone said, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time?
So it doesn't seem like you have a problem with getting so many words a day. I mean, I haven't read the whole thing of this, but I have to say it's very polished, and you got, by page 20, it's boom, boom, you're in the story. So you think...
When I first sent the book in to Black Opal, they called back and they said, this is very, very good, but it's not in a published format yet. What you need to do, and they told me about 15 different things I needed to do. So they gave me a month to correct it, and within a week, I had the whole thing corrected and sent back to them. There's certain things I didn't know. I didn't know that there's 52 contractions that took up 75 words, which I had to correct because contractions are in dialogue. I didn't know that.
Okay.
I didn't know you couldn't use semicolons in fiction. So I was told. So I had to take out 420 semicolons because when grant writing, you always
Yeah,
use semicolons for everything. So there was things I did not have a clue about. But the big thing is, in the first 1 or 2 chapters, you better have something really good happen, or no one will read it any further than that, and you cannot do a backstory until after page 100. I didn't know that either.
You mean, build the character.
To build a character after the story is started to be established. So
Okay.
I went back and looked at my books. Was I frustrated? Of course, because I didn't know anything. So I went back and then reconstructed all 3 books that I had already written, including that one, and reconstructed it, and quite frankly, it is 10 times better than what I originally wrote.
And it sounds like the people at Black Opal Books, it sounds like they took a lot of time to...
Yeah.
They didn't just read it and say,
It's not like, well, I don't have
they saw something.
an agent, so I went right to the publisher, and it's very rare, and this is a very good publishing company. They started in 2010. When I joined in last February of 2014, there were 70 authors. Right now there's 160 they've signed up. So they're growing like crazy, but they give authors a chance.
All right, that's...
Where the major publishers, they can't afford to take a chance.
They want somebody who's going to sell 1 million copies.
Exactly. So they were excellent to me. I've had 3 or 4 edits from them. I've, of course, edited it about 50 times.
All right. So now how do you say the word again?
It's conch.
Conch, all right.
Is a shell. It's a seashell, just like a clam or anything else, and it comes from Florida.
All right, so let's talk about the book, Conch Town Girl.
The meaning of Conch Town Girl. And I had to do a lot of research for this because I knew nothing about the Coast Guard, about South Florida per se. I've been there, obviously.
Yeah.
But the Conch people, you've probably heard it in songs and all that. But after the Revolutionary War, the English settlers had to go someplace because they were loyal to the king. So they went to Bermuda. All the English settlers took off, and about 50,000 of them went to Bermuda. And over 10 generations, they moved from Bermuda to the Florida Keys, which is actually at the same parallel.
Okay.
So people who are the original saltwater conch people are the people that originally, after the Revolutionary War, they are white, they are English speaking, they are English ancestry, and they've just moved over and they became the Conch. So when you hear Conch Nation, it actually began from the Revolutionary War. This girl is English. Her name is Julie Chapman. Her family, her grandfather's name is George, just like King George. He was named after King George. And she grew up poor in the Florida Keys.
It sounds like you have fun creating these backstories here with the...
Well, before I do anything, I want to make sure that they're readable, that people have an interest in it, and actually, like a grant, like anything else, you can convey that, you know, there's an interest. What is she like? You know, what is this about? How did she grow up? Where did she go to school? So, I mean, I had to go through. I went to MapQuest. I had to go to Google Earth. I knew where her house was located. I pictured her house on Google Earth. I knew exactly where it was. I knew her grandmother worked at the Waffle House. I knew that it was 2 blocks from the church that they attended. It was the road that they went to. I knew how many miles it was. So when I got that, and then they had to go up to Miami, I wanted to, because this is the way I kind of read, I want to follow them as they go through the book. And I mean, they move. They constantly move. They don't just sit in the house and do dialogue. They actually move from place to place to place.
So how did you come up with... tell us about how you came up with, you send her and Joe on the plot. How did you come up with that?
Well, Joe was in the Coast Guard. He was 18 years old. He was turning 19 in April. He went to MIT in a full scholarship, and he really didn't, he wasn't pleased with himself. He was a math major and a whiz, and he got perfect scores on his, you know, SATs and math.
You have created a big backstory with these guys.
So he got tired of it, and he figured, he came from a construction family, and he knew that, you know, you got to have self-confidence, and he could probably pretty much live on his own and do what he wants. So he was going to finish the degree, but he's never went anywhere. So he went over on the other side of Boston and joined the Coast Guard for 8 years. So all his training took place in New Jersey, down at Cape May, New Jersey, and I went through how he sat there with 5 of his close friends that he made, and then after he got done that training, they gave him a test. He ranked 2nd highest in history of the test for that. So they put him in the espionage division. He was 18 years old. Now he's 18, he doesn't know anything. So half his training was book learning, and the other half, they sent him down to Isla Morada on the ships so he could learn exactly what it is to be a Coast Guard. He's 19 years old, and because he's young, they used him as a recruiting tool, because who better to recruit than kids that live in the Florida Keys that are used to the ocean and the Coast Guard?
Now, is this backstory, is that in
It's
here?
in here.
I didn't get that far.
Yep,
Okay.
it's in there. And what happens, he had to go to career day at a 5th grade class, for 10-year-olds, and talk about the Coast Guard as a career. He went with another person who was of Mexican heritage, and the person that was in charge of him, who wound up being a very close friend of his, they walked in one day, and they were talking, and he was explaining that he looked no older than the kids that were in the high school, because that's all he really was. He was 6 months older than the kids in the high school. So this one little girl, who was 10 years old, named Julie Chapman, went up to him and said, "Joe, can I go in and see your boat?" And Joe said, "Well, I don't know." So he went and talked to the other person. He goes, "Yes, but you have to bring your parents have to sign off. They got to come with you." And she said, I can't because my parents are dead." And it started that way. He goes, "Really?" He goes, "Well, who do you live with?" He goes, "I live with Tilly. She's my grandmother, but she's only in her early 40s, and she doesn't like to be called grandmother, so I have to call her Tilly." And that's how the story started. The following week, she went and visited Joe, and they became lifelong friends.
Well, when the book opens, they're both obviously, what, in their 20s or 30s? Or?
Well, when this book opens now, he's known her since she was 10 years old. She just graduated from Brown University.
Okay.
He's known her for almost 14 years.
Okay.
He called her every Wednesday, every year, every week since he met her when he was 10 years old. Because they were really close personal friends, and it was his family in Florida is what he considered them.
When he was down there. So how did you come up with the idea, Tilly, the grandmother, gets run off the road, and Joe and Julie, go on to solve the mystery or whatever, but how did you come up with all the...
Well, the first thing, I didn't think about Tilly at first. I needed Joe to wind up back in Isla Mirada.
Oh, okay. That's right. He starts out, he's in Troy.
He's in Troy. He's working for the Albany Coalition for Families. He's an RPI graduate. He just settled in there, and he found out that the organization was being used as a money laundering scheme. So he helped solve that whole problem, and now he's sitting there. And I needed him to get out of that area because he was going to be leaving there. So I needed some kind of attempt for him to go down to Isla Mirada. So obviously, the grandmother, the best thing, she saw something. She's going into her Waffle House, and she saw something that shocked her. She hopped back in her car, was driving down the road, and got ran off the road. And that's how it starts. Julie was really upset. She called Joe, who happens to be her best friend, and she goes, she's unconscious. She's sitting in the hospital. I don't know if she's going to make it or not. And Joe said, I'll be down.
Okay.
And that's how the whole story starts.
And then I know you said you have other books you either have written or are writing. Do you see this as a possible series? The other ones have the same, have Julie and Joe? And
when I wrote all the books, I wanted to envision a series because I like series. If you take a look at some of the books I read,
Yes,
I mean, Archer Meyer series, and Michael Connolly with Harry Bosch, a series, and the same thing with Lee Child. I like that because I like to be familiar with the characters. I find it difficult reading a new book with new characters because you really got to pay really close attention to find out what's going on. If you're into the 10th book of a series, you know the backstory, you like it, and that's why you're reading the next one.
Well,
that's really what I wanted to do.
That's why I think some of the authors I mentioned before are so popular. You mentioned Spencer, the Robert Parker.
Right.
There was like 30 or 40 of them. Yeah, there's a familiarity with them, and you read one, you want to see.
You want to read the next one?
You want to read the next one because or John D. McDonald, Travis McGee,
Right.
People do, because the authors that you've read are obviously, they all put out maybe a book a year, more or less, same characters.
Every year.
So do you think you're going to find it difficult to come up with new adventures, or do you keep developing the characters? You keep adding to the backstory, or is it, you don't know at this point?
The publisher called me and goes, Dan, in your books you have 12 Johns. You have to change them. I found it very difficult coming up with names. So, like my lists, I had to write it down. In 4 books, I have 134 characters I got to keep track of.
Okay.
Now, obviously, Julie and Joe are the important, and Tilly, his best friend Mark Silva, and all the other people that I created. And the funniest thing, I was talking to a friend of mine that I work with, and he's talking about Joe Trainer. And I go, did you know that Joe's not real? And he said, he is. He really is, and so isn't Julie, and I want to know what the next book is. So people who have read this book immediately go, when's the next book coming out? I got to read it, because the way I end it, they know that there's going to be another book and another book and another book.
Well, why don't you just talk a little bit about the plot of this? You don't have to, don't give anything away, but I'll just say that the book, the library, we have 2 copies. You can come in and check it out, or you can buy it on Amazon.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Barnes & Noble, but...
E-book, too.
You can get it in e-book form, yes. They're becoming very popular. So give us the, if you want to pique people's interest, we already know that Julie's grandmother gets run off the road. Joe comes on to help. Just give us the bare outlines. And I noticed some of the comments on your book. There was some romance in here. Julie and
I can't give that away.
I don't want to give it away. But I mean, it's interesting. In the front of your book, under genre, it says mystery with romantic elements or something. So this may appeal to men.
Well, what happens?
Men and women.
They're not that. When they were 10 and 19, okay, there's a huge age difference, obviously. But when you're 32, 33, and 24,
Yeah, that's.
I mean, there's not a huge age difference. And being your best friend and knowing everything about them, I mean, Julie's obviously been in love with Joe since she was 10 years old, because Tilly, the grandmother, said, I knew this was going to happen since the day you came home and told me all about how you met the Coast Guard guy.
Okay. So you're going to be developed. Or I shouldn't say you're going to be. You've developed.
I've already developed it. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the main plot line of this book?
Well, the plot line here is that this poor little girl is her father was lost at sea. He was a fisherman, and her mother was so distraught that she took a drug overdose and died. And they left Tilly to take care of. She's 41 years old, and the granddaughter is 8 years old. And all she is a waitress at the Waffle House. And Julie is almost brilliant. She's just a very, very bright girl growing up, but it was just the two of them. They didn't have anything. They had a 13-inch TV, I explained, with a little aluminum foil for an antenna, right? But they had their house that they paid $14,000 for back in the 1960s, right? That's all they had until he paid all the bills and made sure everything happened. But it was just her and the grandmother against the world. Julie winds up with a full scholarship to Brown University. And it's a story within a story. Julie was writing her nonfiction life story, and her story is called Conch Town Girl.
Oh, okay. That's what it. Okay.
Excuse me.
Oh.
And what happened was she went into the Master's of Fine Arts program. There's only 10 or 20 if you go to Brown University. I had to download all that information and figure out how she graduated. And her best friend and roommate was from Massachusetts, and she's involved in all this. So what happens, they gave her a stipend to finish her book. So she had to go home, back to Key Largo, and finish her book at the same time. But how can she finish her book when her grandmother's in the hospital, not know if she's going to live or die? Joe came down to help her with the grandmother and help maybe solve the problem. And what happens, they're cleaning up the house, not knowing if she's going to live or die and everything else. And they go up to the attic and clean it out, and they find $300,000 in cash.
Okay.
And where did it come from? So the story kind of takes it from there. Her father, when he died, was...
Well, I should say that the grandmother didn't just have an accident. She was run off.
She was run off the road, deliberately,
then,
but the cops thought she was just a hit and run, kind of an accident, and they had no idea.
So
and they weren't going to do anything about it because they thought it was nothing.
So then Joe and Julie find the 300, then it's sort of...
And then it takes off from there. Well, how did it get there? Who put it there? Did Tilly know about it? Tilly's unconscious. Of course, she didn't know anything about it. She's a good Catholic woman and the waitress working at the Waffle House. How would she know about any of this? So Joe is still now in the Coast Guard, and he's got all his friends in the espionage division. So he starts doing fingerprinting. He starts doing facial recognition. He starts using his math skills to figure out exactly how could this happen. Her father died 17 years ago. They never found his body. They found the other two guys, but what happened? Was he a drug runner? Because on the money, there was straps, and it said Cayman Islands on the inside of the strap. But on the strap, there was a symbol for $10,000 on each one of them. There was 300,000. There was 30 of these $10,000 packets. How'd they get there with the Russian on it? What did they do with the money? How are they going to get involved? What does this really mean? So the whole story evolves from there, and then it gets solved at the end. But things happen. There's obviously an open door at the end of it to go into the next one, and then the next one.
Right. Well, you sound like you've done a lot of research.
I really have.
And you've, just the way you're describing the plot and the characters and how you did it, all the authors that you love, that you've read, that I already, David Baldacci, John Grisham, Lee Child, it sounds like you've...
They do it the same way.
It sounds like you've studied them, closely. So what has been, I noticed the Black Opal people obviously loved your book. They're publishing the other ones. What has, I know it's, the book just came out. What response have you received so far, either from Amazon reviews or reviews in other, I don't know if, it's hard, I think, sometimes to get reviews in the New York Times, but.
I won't know how many sold until the end of January. I get a report every 3 months. It started only November 1st.
But other than sales, have you heard from readers? I mean, that's my main.
The big item, I got a call from the International Thriller Writers, which is an organization with Lee Child as the president.
Oh, okay.
Now, because Black Opal is a national publisher, I was allowed to join, so I joined.
Yes, I should say to people, this is not a self-published book. Black Opal is a publisher of
From a lot of,
mysteries.
Parkdale, Oregon.
Yeah, they're
They're growing. They started in 2010, 170 authors. They've published 1,000 books so far.
yeah, I should say, yeah, it comes across, I didn't get that far in it, but it's very polished, I should say. And all your research.
Now, new books are not coming out hardcover anymore.
I know.
They're coming out just like that because it's $11.95, not $29.95.
So,
An e-book is $2.99. They'd like to sell books.
so go back to Black Opal and what and the response. Have you?
So what happened on Amazon, I've had two reviews. One was a 4-star from an author in California, and the other was a 5-star. On the book itself, they went out and got 2 independent reviews, and I got 4.3 and 4.1 stars. But international thriller writers asked me if I would like to apply for their debut author program for brand new authors. Now, I'm 66 years old, so being a debut author is like someone in their 20s. So I applied, and they accepted me. And they featured the book in their January newsletter that goes out to 22,000 authors and readers.
Oh, okay.
So if you go on the international
people
thriller writers,
of mystery suspense. Okay.
mystery suspense, and Lee Child again is the president. So they got a picture of my book, and in there are the books released in January or November in the last 3 months. If you press on Conch Town Girl, there's another debut. A review of the whole thing, and it says this is a series to watch, which was very, very nice.
Yeah.
I got a call last night, and they asked me, and I do things relatively quickly because, again, here I am. I'm a grant writer. I can't help myself. I've never missed a deadline, anything. So yesterday they emailed me, and they asked me to do a blog for March. So I sat down last night, and I did the blog. And I sent it to them just to see if they would like it, because I'd rather have it wrong 5 times and send it incorrectly than have it sent in at the last minute and then say it's not good enough, quite frankly. I mean, it's always kind of the way I've been. So I just explain, and the title of it is,
Oh, okay. How I got to.
it's How I Got to Where I Am and What Crazy Ride It's Been. So over the last 2 years, I've written 4 books. I got turned down by 125 different agents. And so I wrote a second book. I wasn't going to give up because I didn't like the first book. I said, I'll write a better book, the second book, which was actually that one. And it got picked up immediately by Black Opal.
Okay.
Now, they sent me an email and said, well, you need to do this, this, and
Okay,
this.
that's right. Yeah, you went.
And to make changes on it, I'll be more than happy to. And I did that within a week, and they gave me a contract.
Well, one thing about all these authors that we keep mentioning, they don't seem to have a problem writing 20, 30, 40 books. So even though you're 66, it sounds like you're not going to have a problem writing 10 or 15 more with that.
I've already started the 5th in my head.
All right, so there you go.
So one of the characters in the 4th book may be the star of the 5th book.
Okay.
And Joe and Julie take a back seat.
All right, so you're...
But they're going to be in it half the book, but they'll be taking a back seat to another character, which, you know, that's what I like these genre, because you can go in 20 different directions with all the characters if they're likable, but they have to be likable. I've read books where the characters are not likable, and you put it down halfway through because you really don't want to read any more about this person that you don't like.
But I mean, as long as you have a viable character, like again, all these like David Stewart Woods, you know, people are going to read them, and you can send them literally anywhere. I mean, all right. So when does the next one come out?
I'm not sure, but I signed a contract, and they're supposed to be out by June of this year.
Okay.
But I'm probably going to have to give them a leeway because they're growing so quickly, and this book just came out in November.
Okay.
So probably within the next 2 years, I'll have my next 3 books out.
Okay. Now, I said the library owns these. You can go and check them out. You can get them on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Or do you have to have a web page or anything? Or?
Yes, it's DanielJBarrettAuthor.com. I just started it.
Okay.
This is all new to me, quite frankly. I had to do Facebook for the first time ever. I don't even know how to like people yet, and I'm learning quickly.
Okay.
So I'm on that.
Now, I just had one quick question. Your book's available in the e-format.
Yes.
Do you know? Are you selling more that way than the traditional way, or do you don't know yet? You don't know.
I don't know yet, but the one thing I do know that Amazon Prime, if you sign up for it, and I think it's a great deal, quite frankly, you can get a book in 2 days, and it's free shipping.
Okay.
So they've been shipping it out to everybody that I know have called me, and they've ordered the book, and they've gotten 2 days. So they've had to have an inventory of books at Amazon from Black Opal in order to sell them in 2 days.
Oh, okay.
Same thing with Barnes & Noble. And I know the ebook, I know a lot of people who bought it and they downloaded it immediately. So they're completely hooked up, set up, and everything else to get the ebook.
Well, I would just have to say this is an amazing story, actually.
Thank you.
I love how you went about this. It's like you studied the masters of this genre and said, I can do that too.
If someone says to you, well, how do you know I write a book? I go, well, I read 1,500 of them.
Yeah, that's excellent.
No, they're good, bad, and indifferent, and all I really wanted to do was just write a book.
Well, yeah, well, you're...
And actually, this is overwhelming to me at this point of all the things that I've created for myself. I mean, I'm not going to retire until I die, apparently.
Excellent.
So-
Well, when your next book comes out, come back and see us, because
will.
not only can you tell us about the new book, we can find out how Conch Town Girl did. So Daniel Barrett from Troy, New York, first-time author at age 66. A really interesting story about how he read all the books. So you should probably put something on your website of the book lists and how you did all that.
I was thinking about doing that. I have to figure out how to do that.
I kept mentioning these authors and everything, but it doesn't even touch the surface of the list you gave me. So very good. So thank you for coming, Dan.
Thank you very much.
And we will see you next time on Meet the Author.